Okay, today I'm here to show you how to make lobster mac and cheese. Now there's a lot of lobster mac and cheese out there, but this one is a particularly decadent version that is sure to impress your date. Now the first thing we're going to do is melt 2 tablespoons of butter over medium heat. Next we'll stir in 1 cup of finely chopped or minced onion. And what we're going to do is sweat this. Now, if you've taken any of my courses on learning to cook like a pro, you already know about sweating. If you haven't taken them, sweating basically means to remove the moisture from the vegetable, whatever it happens to be. This is onions. So to sweat them, you cook them on medium heat until they become translucent. You might start to see some steam coming off. Once that steam starts to go away, they're sweated. They're ready to go to the next step. This is going to take about 3 to 4 minutes on medium heat to sweat these onions. Okay, it's been about 3 or 4 minutes. The the onions are nice and soft and translucent. You want to stop this cooking, this sweating, before they start to brown. Now the next thing we're going to do is to add the milk, which is 6 cups of milk. Stir it up. We want to bring that to a boil. Now we want to just bring it to a boil. So just when we start to get some bubbles, big bubbles, we're going to reduce the heat and simmer it. So I'm turning the heat up to medium-high. Okay, we're just starting to get some big bubbles. I'm going to reduce the heat to low, or even as low as it can go. And we're going to simmer it for 20 minutes. Now simmering means that there's no boiling. It's just steam's coming off of it. It's just cooking along at a low temperature. If you start to notice that there are any bubbles like it's boiling, turn the heat down. All right, now we're going to let this simmer for 20 minutes. Now while the onions are steeping in the milk, we're going to make a white roux. Now a roux is always a combination of fat, which is often butter, it could be oil, and flour, usually in equal proportions. So today we're making a roux with 1/4 cup of butter and 1/4 cup of all-purpose flour. We're going to turn that on to low heat to start, because the butter is not yet melted. If you start with melted butter, you can start with a little bit higher temperature of the on the stove. Now we're going to stir this up. Do not stop stirring it. We're making a white roux. White roux means that it hasn't taken on any color. There's also a blonde roux and a dark roux. We're making a white roux, which is the first step in making a roux. Those others, the blonde and the dark, they cook longer. Here, what we're going to do is we're going to mix the flour and the butter together and cook them really only for a few minutes. And that makes a white roux. And if you see any lumps, you want to try to stir those out of there. Make sure you get down into the corners of the pan so that there's nothing that burns in the corners. So we'll cook this for about 3 minutes, 3 or 4 minutes, stirring it almost constantly. Okay, it's been about 3 minutes. The point of cooking it for a couple minutes is to cook out the raw flour taste. And what we're going to do is turn off the heat and just keep this in a warm place until we have that milk ready to add to it. All right, now we're going to pour this milk into the roux slowly. And we're not going to put it all in there because we want to get a good consistency to this sauce. We don't want it to be too thick. We don't want it to be too thin. Okay, now it's thickening up as we put the milk in. So I'm going to put in all but about 1/4 of this milk. I'm going to hold that aside. If the sauce gets a nice consistency with that much, then we won't put any more in. And what we're making here is a bechamel sauce, which is one of the basic sauces of French cooking. Bechamel is basically just flour, butter, milk, and onions. I've seen some recipes out there for bechamel that have cheese in them. If you add cheese to bechamel, it's Mornay sauce. It's not bechamel sauce. We're making a bechamel today. Now we will be using this bechamel to make the lobster mac and cheese, which has cheese in it. But we're not going to. What we're doing is we're making a bechamel, and then we're going to be adding cheese to make the final dish. We're not actually making a Mornay sauce. Now this sauce will get silkier as it cooks. And we're going to cook it for probably maybe about 5 minutes, stirring it, whisking it. Okay, we've been cooking and stirring for about 3 or 4 minutes. I like the consistency. It's slightly thick, not too thin, still soupy. So I'm not going to add any more of that milk. All right, now we're going to turn off the heat and we're going to add some salt. How much salt? Add enough to taste, what you like, okay? And we're also, and that's kosher salt, by the way. We're also going to add a little touch of white pepper. Now, a lot of recipes for bechamel call for black pepper. I don't use black pepper because it leaves little black specks in the sauce. So I use white pepper, but don't use too much. White pepper goes a long way. Also, at this stage in making a bechamel, you normally, a classic bechamel, you would strain it to get all of those onions out of there. You can either strain it after you have cooked them in the milk, in other words, just strain the milk, or you can strain the whole thing after you've put the milk into the roux. But since we're going to be using this bechamel in the lobster mac and cheese, I'm going to keep those onions in there. If I was going to be using this sauce for some other purpose, I might strain those onions out. Now we also want to add a little bit of freshly grated nutmeg. How much? Again, to taste. And again, nutmeg goes a long way, so you don't have to use a lot of it. Stir that in. Now, if you're going to be using this bechamel sauce right away to make the mac and cheese, keep it warm until you're ready to use it. If you're not going to be using it until the next day, put it in the fridge, bring it out, warm it up before you start putting together your mac and cheese. Okay, so let's taste it. It's good. I think it needs just a little bit more salt. So we're gonna add a little bit more salt. I don't think it needs any more pepper. We're gonna stir that up and taste it again. This is called adjusting seasoning. Perfect.